good chance of a trade deal with the UK. He also says Britain's in a better position to get an agreement than other European countries because of Donald Trump's affection for it. The person who got those quotes from JD Vance is the US editor of Unheard, Sohrab Ahmari, who's been speaking to Times Radio.
He also noted the fact that, as it is, the White House views the US-UK relationship as being pretty reciprocal to begin with, unlike America's trade relationship with Germany, which he highlighted as one that is very lopsided, where the Germans rely so heavily on the US home market as a sort of sponge for their surplus exports.
The lead post office campaigner is urging victims of the Horizon IT scandal to sue the government for delays in getting compensation. Sir Alan Bates has suggested it'll take another 2.5 years for claims to be settled in full, though the Business Secretary disputes that. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey was the Postal Affairs Minister at the height of the scandal. He says the payouts are overdue.
Frankly, that should have happened years ago after the 2019 High Court case. The Conservatives dragged their feet. Labour said they wouldn't, but they are. So I think Sir Alan Bates is absolutely right. The government should be taken to court.
A man's admitted murdering 2 women in Milton Keynes on Christmas Day last year. The 49-year-old, who's also pleaded guilty to stabbing a man and a teenage boy, will be sentenced next month. In politics, a poll for The Sun suggests Reform UK is leading Labour in its traditional heartlands. The Survation poll of more than 2,000 people across the north of England, Yorkshire and the Midlands puts Reform UK on 30%, Labour on 27% and the Conservatives on 22%. Harry Cole is The Sun's political editor.
Conservatives are just not even on the pitch. They held large parts of these constituencies across the then so-called Red Wall, Blue Wall, whatever, what it became, Boris Wall, but now is, universally known as the Red Wall. Kemi Badenoch's numbers are terrible, her recognition is terrible, and it's becoming a straight fight between Reform and Labour.
Police investigating an explosion at a house in Nottinghamshire on Saturday have arrested a man on suspicion of murder. David Howard's body was recovered from the debris and workshop. A 43-year-old's being questioned and bailed. Andrew Tate is to face trial over allegations he subjected 4 women to sexual or physical abuse. It's thought to be the first time coercive control has been brought before the High Court in a civil case. The controversial influencer denies the claims and says he will defend himself vigorously. The trial could take place in early 2027. And a man's been jailed for 8.5 years after helping cyber criminals to defraud 1 million victims across 91 countries. 24-year-old Zach Coyne from Huddersfield ran a subscription-based service faking websites. Amazon, Netflix and British banks were included. £32 million was lost in the UK alone. And don't forget, you can set the Times News briefing as your flash briefing on Alexa.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with NatWest Cushion.
It is good to have you with us on Pienaar Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is Rachel Cunliffe, the Associate Editor at the New Statesman. Hello, Rachel.
Hello.
Hi, welcome back. And Adam Boulton from Times Radio. Adam, been several moments since I last saw you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Shall we start with you, Rachel? What's your thought for the day?
So I've been thinking about the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the SAVE Act, which is this attempt to combat voter fraud, which is virtually non-existent in the US, and by making all American citizens prove citizenship by presenting documents like birth certificates or passports. Now, about half of Americans don't have passports, and many of them won't have a birth certificate or will find it hard to find their birth certificate, or, this is the crucial one, their name may have changed since their birth certificate. And the Trump White House is basically saying that this won't be a problem for anyone, but one group that it might be a problem for is married women who have changed their names. And I find this really interesting, and this is a slightly tongue-in-cheek way into it, but I wonder if additional barriers to voting for millions of American women, because the Republicans have said, oh, if it's fine, you just have to turn up with your marriage certificate, it won't be a problem at all, like everyone knows what their marriage certificate is if they've been married for decades. I wonder if this might challenge the convention that women change their name on marriage. Maybe it will discourage them from getting married at all. Maybe they won't be paying attention because there's a lot of other stuff going on in America at the moment. But when I got married, I was actually quite surprised at the assumption that I would change my name, which is a very UK and American-based custom. Other countries do all kinds of different things. But the default was I was getting married, I would change my name. Right. And when I didn't, that raised quite a lot of eyebrows, even among people who I thought know me quite well and would know that I wouldn't be doing that. So I wonder if this is going to restart the conversation about, maybe if you get married and you change your name, you could lose your voting rights. That's quite a compelling message, I think.
It's a thought. I mean, how common is this? I thought it was reasonably common for women not to take their husband.
Yeah, there's actually a poll in the paper today, I think in the Times today, which is saying that about 40% of men and women no longer expect people to change their name when they get married. Yeah. And certainly I think it's possible to do both. I mean, all my daughters, their working name is their maiden name, but they're, they are their children's mother when they go to school with a different name. Yeah. But I mean, I think this is really serious because I think, Rachel's absolutely right. This is voter suppression. I mean, it's a game that has been played in America for generations to try and discourage or make it difficult for the people who are not going to vote for you to vote. And it's typically been used against minorities, black people, all the rest of it. And I'm sure that is the intention. Although, interestingly, the Times Law and Order Commission today is saying one of the things we need is, guess what, ID cards, digital ID cards, to be able to control the population. And I think if you had a fair system of identity, it would be all right. But precisely because the people calling for this know that different sections of the community have different problems in terms of producing a piece of ID that's acceptable, it's deeply wrong, and it's yet another assault on democracy by the Trump people. Yeah, I mean, we remember before the last general election, there was a lot of talk about this, not least in this studio, about the ID rules for to cast your vote in the general election. Would it lead to an enormous fall off in turnout? It didn't actually. There was a fairly insignificant impact on British voting, but America, in that sense, is a very different country, and people don't have these documents. We're just different.
I'm being slightly facetious by focusing on the married women point, because there are lots of other groups that are far more at risk, sort of immigrant communities who may have got citizenship, also trans people who will have changed their name, whatever you believe about ability to change sex and gender, saying that somebody who has changed their name for whatever reason no longer has the right to vote. That's pretty draconian. And there are other restrictions that they want to bring in about restrictions on postal voting. We know that Trump thinks that postal voting is fraud, and there are all kinds of dodgy things that go on in various US elections with very, very long queues, and you're not allowed to hand out water to people in the queues, and polling stations don't open at certain times, or they open more and more affluent areas.
Elon Musk can give you checks, but you can't give people water.
Exactly. But one of the things that is interesting about the UK example is that we did bring in, the Conservatives brought in these voter ID requirements, and there was an expectation that the voter groups that would be most disadvantaged by this would be the ones that are less likely to vote Conservative. Yes. I remember that you could use a freedom pass for the over 65s, but you couldn't use, for example, student ID or a student Oyster card. And actually, Jacob Rees-Mogg is on record saying that it hurt the Conservatives, primarily older voters too, because older people don't have to carry ID because they don't worry about getting ID'd in pubs. So sometimes these things backfire.
I do remember Jacob Rees-Mogg saying the quiet part out loud in that way. I should say I'm watching the news feed from the briefing room at the White House, in the West Wing of the White House, where the press secretary to the president, Karoline Leavitt, I think it's going to be very shortly, is going to give her regular briefing to journalists there. When that happens, we will cross live and have a listen, make sure that we pick up anything that you will want to know. I promise you're not going to be left out. You will miss nothing. While we're waiting for that, Adam, what's your thought for today?
My thought for today is a bit off the wall. It's about roller coasters, the fascination of roller coasters. I mean, it's partly prompted by the announcement of the Universal Park in Bedford, and Sir Keir Starmer predictably saying, they told me politics was a roller coaster, but I wasn't expecting it like this. It's partly because there have been so many.
Not a great fan
It's
of,
so
of the
bad.
Prime
It's
Minister's
such a bad
impromptu.
pun.
Yeah.
Such a bad pun.
So many metaphors, cartoons in the newspapers of the crashing stock market as a roller coaster. There have been attack ads in America saying, don't vote for them because the country will be going through a roller coaster. As it happens, there's rather a good programme with Hannah Fry on BBC Two this week about roller coasters. So I just am intrigued by roller coasters, which basically are feats of engineering and technology just for the purpose of fun, which have become a tremendous metaphor really for decline and risks you don't want to take.
That's a thought. Are you a roller coaster man? Have you?
I've done a lot of filming on roller coasters. I mean, I haven't sort of seeked them out for fun, but every so often.
I think I've seen one of those.
Yeah. You can see them
yes.
on YouTube. I mean, we're streaming on YouTube. You see.
Yeah.
I mean, every so often, some producer says, "Oh, I know what would be a really good metaphor for the uncertainty of politics. Why don't you do a piece to camera on a roller coaster?"
Yeah.
And of course, if you do that, you have to go around about 4 or 5 times to get it right.
Yeah.
And what you discover is first time. Terrifying. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't work out that actually, those vertical drops start from zero. So actually, it's just like jumping. But once you've done it once, it's a lot less scary. So even cowards, I suggest that you go around several times and you'll find that it's not as frightening as it was.
I've got to say, I've seen that device used a few times in news filming. I'm sure the idea is put together by producers who just want to have a laugh watching the rushes over and over again, which you look a complete muppet.
Yeah, but there is part of that. I mean, the really difficult one is to actually talk while you're doing it. That is quite difficult. I have done.
And remember your piece to camera, especially if it's a long one.
The thing I've always wanted to do is there's a webcomic called XKCD that has this as an idea where you glue pieces onto a chessboard and you take that with you onto the roller coaster. So when you get your photo of you on the roller coaster, everyone else is screaming and you're there looking like you're playing this perfect game of chess. And I have always wanted to do that.
They're actually very strict about letting you take loose items onto chessboards. So
you're ruining my dream, Adam.
Okay, watching the White House briefing room, no sign of the press secretary yet. Lots of anticipation. Obviously, it's a crowded room in there. All the mainstream media, as I suppose we have come to be categorised. You've got the various influencers and podcasters.
Yeah, they've had their
piling
seats
into the
taken
room as
away.
well.
The networks. And
Yeah, it's a much more, a much more sort of eclectic crowd than it ever was, and it's rather evened the balance up in terms of support and criticism of President Trump. While we're waiting for that, the story we've been headlining through the day is the Vice President telling us or giving us as his view that there is a good chance of a great trade deal between America and the United States. Now we're told that it's raised hopes and hearts in number 10 Downing Street. Has it raised your expectations, Richard?
Well, I'm a bit confused. I'm getting used to being very confused by things that come out of the White House, because Britain has the baseline tariffs, the 10% ones, and the message very much has been that get on the phone to President Trump and make a deal, but that's for the ones that are above that baseline. That's for 20%, 25%, China, whatever. And there hasn't really been any messaging so far that that 10% would be negotiable. So is that changing for Britain?
I think the impression has been that 10% is staying.
10%,
and we're talking about the 25% on cars and steel. And
so in which case we're talking about a trade deal for to counter the additional tariffs and also things like pharmaceuticals and cars and steel, which don't help us as much as the sort of the baseline one. So what are we actually negotiating for?
Pharmaceuticals, it's our second biggest export to the United States, and it's not hit yet. But the president is now just in one of those, here's another one, guys, another one of those announcements telling us that they're going to have a study into pharmaceuticals for another round of
But we're still operating from a baseline where we have we export less to the US than they export to import from us. So they are winning in Trump's sort of zero-sum trade game already, and they're still putting 10% on us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely with Rachel. I think, not only is it difficult to see what we could gain, but it's also pretty clear to see what the White House game is, and that is to attempt to drive a wedge between the UK and the European Union. David Frum, the commentator, the Republican, never Trumper, has actually been putting out on social media this: don't be fooled a second time. You were fooled the first time by the Trump administration after Brexit, saying, oh yeah, we can do a deal. And that meant that Boris Johnson went full steam for a hard Brexit. This time round, it seems to be almost the same thing to say, he actually said it to Vance in the interview, oh yeah, we love the UK, but we're not so sure about those Europeans, they're not like that. I mean, I just don't think we have anything to gain by playing this game. I agree with the government that, because these people are so vicious and thin-skinned, it's worth being polite and entertaining them in public. That seems to be the sensible route. But actually expecting that they're going to do anything to get out of it is ridiculous. I mean, just look at the basic premise. The basic premise is they want to sell stuff to us, but they don't want to buy stuff from us. And even British companies, they want to take British jobs from this country and put them into the United States.
Yes.
It's not a great offer.
Yeah, I mean, your point is kind of reinforced by the Vice President saying one of the reasons driving a possible deal towards the line is the fact that President Trump just has this affinity with Britain. We know about his family roots, his mother from the Scottish Islands, but also feeling that cultural affinity and so on. It is part of we're not like Europe, you guys. We're going to treat you somewhat differently. It's also a demonstration of presidential power.
Well, yeah.
If a thing is decided by cultural affinity,
it's toying with us, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's doing exactly. I mean, the man only speaks one language, so it's easier dealing with the British. Although, of course, that hasn't done the Canadians much good, has it?
Okay, well, more coming up in just a minute. We will get that news conference for you, or all of it that you will want to hear, as and when it happens over in Washington DC. We'll cross live. This is Pienaar Friends with Rachel Cunliffe and with Adam Boulton, with me, John Pienaar, on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Just search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Times.
Told in depth each day. Find it in the Times Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Well, apologies for this, but I really just can't resist it. Well, during that break, if you were watching us on YouTube, on the YouTube Times Radio channel, you would have seen something I suspect and suggest you will not easily forget. Adam just volunteered the memory of his ride on a roller coaster at Blackpool Beach, right, on the Blackpool Beach attractions. He was filming a VT piece, a videotape piece for Sky News, and someone, it wasn't you, Adam, was it, who had the idea of doing it on a roller coaster?
Exactly, to illustrate the ups and downs of politics.
The ups and downs of politics. Now, look, while we're waiting for that brief call, I'm just going to invite you now to go, if you're not there already, and you can do it very quickly, go on YouTube, go to Times Radio and have a look at what you'll there see as the live feed of Adam on that roller coaster in Blackpool Beach. It's up there now. Adam, talk us through it. While we're waiting for the news conference at the White House, what are we seeing? I'm seeing a man who looks, to say the least, uncomfortable.
Well, I didn't have the comfort of a crowd with me. It's me all on my own.
There must have been a crew in front of you.
There was a camera. Actually, I think that one, there's a fixed spot where you can put the cameras on.
So it's just you and the camera.
Yeah. And so I suppose that, you didn't have any comfort of strangers, if you like. But this is the Blackpool big one, which at the time was the highest vertical drop.
Right.
So you go.
Did you know that before? Well, obviously you knew that before you got on.
Yeah, no, I saw it.
And what possessed you to think you could record a piece to camera doing that?
Well, I had previously done a piece to camera, actually, on that for an industry convention, a hypothetical about how different ways people would report a roller coaster accident. And we had teams from Spanish television and public television reporting on that. So I knew you could do it. In fact, that was almost worse, because if you've been doing a piece to camera, you can concentrate on doing that. Whereas that, you just have to sort of sit in the front of the thing and watch your life going by.
Yeah, from what I'm looking at, maybe we can just play the key bit again, if we can just see that clip again. I'm not looking at a journalist who's making any attempt whatsoever to record anything apart from a look of
for that one,
terror.
That was my instructions. I was told not to, because what that was actually for was for an advertisement ahead of a general election, and so they wanted to say, this is physically what it's actually like reporting a general election.
I see.
And they had a sort of soothing voiceover.
Look, if you're watching this on Times Radio on YouTube, there it is again. I'm gonna store that somewhere.
I don't think that's accurate though, because that a roller coaster lasts 3 or 4 minutes maybe, and a general election, covering a general election, lasts years. I don't know how the time works, but when you're covering a general election, by the time you get to polling day, you have been reporting on it for, it feels like, at least 60, 70 years.
No. I think in this case it was the election night programme.
Okay.
Which on Sky, our longest one I presented, I think, was 15 hours. So
that's still a marathon.
And things do change,
All right. You know what? I'm going to regretfully put away from that topic. I could look at that for some time more. And bring it back to something, it's right here, not just close to home, it's right in this building where they've been holding discussion sessions a few floors up here at Times Towers on the Times Crime and Justice Commission. All sorts of ideas contained in the book. You've got a copy in front of you there, Rachel. I mean, masses of data, masses of argument, some really, really solid recommendations, and a serious hope that some of it could find its way into policy. You've had a look at it. It's an impressive piece of work, isn't it?
I mean, it's 110 pages long, and I haven't managed to get through all of it. But there are some really interesting suggestions and case studies, things about sentencing reform, things about court reform, but also looking at, sort of to paraphrase Tony Blair, the causes of crime. And the bit that really stood out to me is there is a case study on a school for young offenders that is they call it a secure school, that is trying to end the kind of inevitability that if you get into trouble when you are a teenager, the school to prison pipeline, like you end up possibly in an adult prison, locked up with hardened criminals who will help you perfect your criminal skills. And basically that's your life trajectory set. And there's a fascinating case study that has made me want to go visit. I'm not sure I'd be able to, if I ever get permission to go, but where they've tried treating these teenagers who have committed really quite serious crimes, but like teenagers in a school where they are taught and their education is prioritised, and where they're not just kind of thrown into the Byzantian labyrinth that is the criminal justice system. So that stood out to me. Also, lots of very interesting stuff on technology, about using AI. Some of it that makes me quite uncomfortable, facial recognition. Not so sure about that. More civil liberties research needed there, I think. But interesting ideas on how to sort of update our criminal justice and policing system that really hasn't kept up with technological advances. Some interesting proposals from Texas, where they've managed to cut the prison population by 15%, from Estonia, that is very good at using this technology, but basically that doesn't just go, you are a bad person, you have committed this crime, we're going to lock you into prison and forget about you, and then act surprised if you come out 5, 10, 15 years later and go straight back to reoffending.
And among the many, many ideas, the idea of a renewable, reviewable licence to police. And I've talked so many times on this programme, and you and I actually, Rachel, have talked many, many times about the collapse of trust in the police in so many areas, including the city that we're sitting in London, and a renewable policing licence, 5 years before a renewal.
Is that for a force or an individual? For
an individual. So each one is a process of assessment, part of the sort of vetting process before they get the job, and later on it's a kind of continual appraisal. But you could lose your licence if you're not up to scratch, and out you go. I'm guessing that's the sort of thing you'd quite like.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because it tackles two things there, one of which is trust in the police. Would we be more likely to trust in our police forces if we knew that they had almost like a professional qualification? Like when you see a doctor, you know that they have a licence to practice medicine. And two, would it help the police forces themselves to address some of those very deep-seated cultural issues, the racism, the misogyny that we have seen with numerous scandals, if it wasn't just you join the police force, you're in, that's it. It was a recurring sort of professional development that you have to keep proving that you are worthy and deserving of the powers that you get, because police officers are granted pretty extraordinary powers that normal, I would say civilians, that's not quite right, but the ordinary people don't have. And that is a privilege. And treating it as such and treating it like something that you have to continue to earn, I think would have an effect, at least in addressing some of those cultural challenges. You still have the issue, though, that not that all police officers are bad, we absolutely know that isn't the case at all, but that people, particularly men, who are more likely to want to be abusive and to want to exploit power, deliberately seek out positions where they have power over others, and the police force offers that, and there hasn't so far been a mechanism to address what do you do if, by its very nature, your profession is attracting some of the most dangerous people in society.
I think the interesting thing about it, and the Times has done this before with health and education, is that it talks to a lot of people involved, and it really comes up with almost kind of common sense answers or recommendations, which are based on what people say privately. If we really wanted to sort this out, we would do this. Yeah. But in the day-to-day business of daily news, they don't often say that because you are concentrating on specifics. Now, I agree with Rachel, there are civil liberties questions, but nonetheless, there are people who say, well, without doing this, in the end, we're just going to be tinkering at the edges. We're not going to get on top of this. Yeah. And if you want to stop shoplifting, for example, facial recognition is a proven way of doing that, but it does have, serious consequences. One of the things that interested me in the report, and there's a lot that's interesting, is what they said about young people, because, of course, there's been a sort of feeding frenzy prompted by Adolescence, that TV programme showing a young boy kill someone. Now, one recommendation is that they want very serious curbs on the under-16s and access to phones and all the rest of it. The other one is raising the age of criminal responsibility to 14.
Yes.
Now, I thought that was, really very interesting, because the tone of the argument following Adolescence has been, you can't trust kids who are really young. But this seemed to be saying, well, actually, they don't really know what they're doing.
Yes.
I actually think that that's two sides of the same coin. That's saying that you maybe can't trust, and I'm going to side with Kemi Badenoch here and say that I also haven't seen Adolescence because we don't have Netflix. But that you can't be certain that a child, even who is quite young, is not getting sucked into very, very dangerous things on the internet. But equally, children are impressionable and easy to manipulate or influence, and therefore, if they end up in the wrong circumstances talking to the wrong people, there could be very horrific and tragic consequences of that. And I think that raising the age of criminal responsibility is kind of intended to reflect that, to say that these are young people who are themselves vulnerable.
OK, now after the news, we are going to cross over to the White House briefing room because the President's press secretary is now at the podium. Karoline Leavitt, we're going to get you right up to date with what's going on there. We're listening. We're going to eavesdrop live in the way that we rather like to on this programme. And Harriet Alexander, our colleague on Stateside, is going to be joining us too here on Pienaar and Friends. Now it's time for the news with Andy Hayes.
Now, listen carefully. I want you to think of selling your car. Who's going to buy that car? Keep thinking. Struggling to know where to look?
Issue is workplace harassment when it comes in the form of, banter from customers standing at a pub bar. Where do you draw the line? So it's really, really tricky, a tricky thing to navigate. And he argues that actually that part of the Workers' Rights Bill should be taken out completely. So I'll be speaking to him about that as well this evening. And we'll take a little look at Sudan. 2 years since the latest civil war broke out, more money pledged by the UK government today. How do you help all those people who are in perilous danger of famine at the moment, but also try and bring about some sort of solution to peace? So a little bit of a focus on that as well this evening.
And also, I think we're hearing from the President, Donald Trump, he's going to be, again, signing more executive orders. I don't know what the tally is now. I must look that up. I mean, there was a time when a new president would sit down on day one and sign up I don't know, less than a dozen orders. Off they would go. Now seems to be a life's work.
Hasn't he already signed more than he did in the whole of his first administration, or
many times
some crazy amount like that? Yeah.
Okay, well, that is coming up. Okay, good to have you.
Cheers, John.
Looking forward to your show at 7 o'clock. And welcome to the show to Harriet Alexander. Hello to you, Harriet.
Hi, John.
Hi. So we're waiting for this briefing. We're going to cross over there and see what's moving, so that something piques our interest. But any thoughts from you on this, the talk which has been on our news bulletins today of the Vice President dangling the possibility of a trade deal with this country? Donald Trump, we sort of know this, rather likes Britain. Maybe that's going to be of some use. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it? Donald Trump definitely does like the UK. I mean, we all saw for ourselves how he reacted with such excitement when Keir Starmer gave him the letter from King Charles inviting him for a state visit. That was definitely the way to his heart. And he's spoken often about his Scottish mother and his affinity for the UK, but whether that's actually going to translate to a trade deal, I think is much harder. Sure, Trump likes the UK, but I think realistically there are far bigger fish to fry, and Vance might be, on something of an attempt to sort of reset the narrative, because of course he went to the Munich Security Conference, was very abrasive in his comments, put up a lot of backs. I think he's sort of slightly trying to backpedal a little bit, trying to put on more of a more friendly face to the UK and the rest of the world. But I think realistically the US is so consumed by these tariffs with countries like China that it's going to be, the UK would be much further down the line.
So, I mean, we're turning the conversation at the briefing over to the subject of Harvard University. We touched on this a bit earlier on in the programme. The Trump administration have been pretty much in an eyeballing confrontation with some of those Ivy League, as they're called, universities in America, some of the oldest, most prestigious universities, not just in America, but in the world, and challenging them. Often the peg for the argument has been suggestions of anti-Semitism. The university is not doing enough to guard against anti-Semitism and protect Jewish students, but it is actually a way into a much wider conflict about the whole culture of the university, what's taught in the classrooms, and who is doing the teaching. Let's just have a listen, because I believe Karoline Leavitt is now being asked about that very thing.
Using to reform in wake of the sort of craziness that we've seen take over some of them.
Thank you, Matt, for being here, and thanks for the question. When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
And I'm curious, you had just mentioned Rachel Morin, and I'm a Maryland man, and I think most Marylanders appreciate what you were saying today. We've seen that Chris Van Hollen, who was Rachel Morin's senator, basically threatening to fly to El Salvador to press for the release of someone who was in America illegally.
We're going to put away now from that. news conference just for the moment. Harriet Alexander in the USA. So look, the question there at the briefing about the freezing of funds, because they have been frozen now, £2 billion worth of federal funds from Harvard as part of a review into federal funds amounting to $9 billion. And there's some. So it's a really serious confrontation, this now, Harriet, isn't it? Because this follows a good deal of tension between the administration and a number of those other, those high prestige universities.
Right, and Harvard is actually the first and so far the only one to really push back against the Trump administration. Columbia University here in New York, which has always historically been a real bastion of protest and of free speech throughout the decades, that university essentially caved to the Trump administration's demands because they did a very similar thing. They said you have to put people in charge of your departments who are going to monitor everything that's going on and make sure that there is no anti-Semitism. That's what they are saying. They wanted campus police at Columbia, which of course is an anathema to many of the academics and the students there, and Columbia accepted that. But Harvard has said no. Harvard is, of course, the richest of all of them. They've got an endowment of $53 billion. So that makes it wealthier than a whole swathe of countries. I mean, it's wealthier than Tunisia, it's wealthier than Bahrain, so it's a very rich institution. And that perhaps enables them to do this because Harvard essentially has said, you can't tell us what to do. And it's interesting, really interesting there that Karoline Leavitt was saying that this is all about basically stopping discrimination, stopping anti-Semitism. But actually, what the administration was demanding of the university was far more than that. For instance, they demanded that you would go and look at all of the academics to check that they hadn't plagiarized anything in their theses. So it was far more than just looking at discrimination.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to put the counter to that. That was, by the spokesperson there, was really a bit of a misrepresentation. I mean, this is what the current president, Alan Garber, has said: no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, who they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. Yeah. And it was significant that just before that bit that we heard from Karoline Leavitt, she actually talked about the administration's demands. I mean, this is a gangsterish move, using federal funds against a powerful, independent institution, which, by its own admission, has made many mistakes. I mean, the former president, of course, had to resign after performing badly before a congressional committee. And what Trump wants to do is to drive down any voices of opposition within American society. And, it's quite clear that, what she is trying to do and what she's saying, very clever, is to mobilize popular opinion against elites. That's why she was talking about how much money they have, how they're elite institutions, and saying that they're racist and anti-Semitic, saying, for example, that, no matter what religion people have, that should be respected. Actually, what they're asking for is that all students and professors should sign up to, quote, American values. And, we know that if you happen to be a Muslim, which was the faith last time I checked, you're not safe from the government moving in against you. Okay. And similarly, at the beginning of her answer, she was talking about, beginning of her statement this morning, she was listing the terrible people who have been deported by ICE, by the intervention, and been sent to El Salvador. But, the fact of the matter is that the government is now defying even the Supreme Court about the deportation of an immigrant, Kilmer Armando Abrego Garcia, to El Salvador, who had no charges against him, who the Supreme Court has said they should bring back. And now both the government of El Salvador and the government of the United States say they can't do that. Yeah. This is about abrogating people's rights. It's not about giving them new rights.
Yeah, we're going to keep on watching that news conference and this conversation about the conversation between the administration and Harvard, which follows confrontations between Columbia University, Princeton has also been in the administration sights as well. A number of those sort of old universities. We'll be talking about that further. I was talking a little while ago on the programme to Jeffrey Flyer, the former dean of Harvard Medical School. We can hear his view. Trust me, he expresses himself pretty trenchantly. More of that coming up here on Pienaar Friends in just a moment. We are here in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Wake up to a bright...
And here with us on Pienaar and Friends, Adam Boulton, Rachel Cunliffe and Harriet Alexander on the line there from New York. We're talking about, because they're talking about in the briefing room at the White House as I speak, among other things, well, the latest confrontation between the administration and Harvard University. One of the most, maybe arguably some would say, it would be disputed, I suppose, in university circles in America, the most prestigious, certainly the wealthiest of the old universities. They have been told to change their culture. They've been criticised over anti-Semitism, but on the campus, the faculty and so many other academics in American academia take the view that it is a very political attack. Well, I spoke just a short while ago on Drive to Jeffrey Flyer. He's the former dean of Harvard Medical School, and he didn't pull his punches. Have a listen.
What is happening now, when you read the latest set of demands that were issued this past Friday, is a set of demands that are seen as an effort to take over the university, and for all intents and purposes, to have a role that would allow it to evaluate and modify and control virtually every aspect of the university's life, from the way we take in students, what they're assessing what their political ideologies are, to the way we evaluate every department and discipline and school, to the way that we operate our disciplinary procedures, and really the governance of the university. This is unprecedented, has no legal basis. It violates the constitutional rights of the institution, and just simply has to be resisted.
All right. That's Jeffrey Flyer then, Dean of Harvard Medical School. And Harriet Alexander in New York. I mean, this story has got an awful lot of prominence today, hasn't it, in the American media? Earlier on in the day, Harriet, this was on the front page and leading, well, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's really caught on, got the people's imagination.
Yes, it has. And I think that's because a lot of people were waiting for one of these universities to actually stand up to the Trump administration. Several of the others actually bowed down to the demands and said, OK, fine, you can put in overseers to keep an eye on our departments, particularly problematic departments like the Department of Middle Eastern Studies, for instance, at Columbia. And they said that they would do what the administration required, whereas Harvard, as you say, you know, the oldest university in the US, certainly the wealthiest, arguably the one with the most clout, they've actually been able to say, no, we're not going to do this. And a lot of people, I think, across the country are really cheering this on. Barack Obama, who graduated in law from Harvard, he doesn't weigh in every day on what Trump is doing. It must be difficult for him not to sometimes. He's normally pretty restrained, but he actually did about this. He praised Harvard and he accused the Trump administration of an unlawful and ham-fisted attempt to stifle academic freedom, which is pretty telling.
And that was a pretty telling intervention from Barack Obama. As you say, ex-presidents don't very often weigh into day-to-day politics. And Barack Obama didn't just criticise the position of the administration in relation to these universities. He called on other academic institutions to fall in behind Harvard's example, sort of just egging on this confrontation to a greater pitch. As I say, a significant moment there, Harriet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that Harvard is seen to take this move, because it's not just Harvard that is coming under pressure to do the right thing, according to the Trump administration. This might be the most high profile one. But, you know, in the US, there's an awful lot of schools and education districts that are under real pressure to ban certain books, to not teach certain issues, to sort of not even go there because they're worried about being reported to officials at local level. So, you know, this fight at the Harvard level, I think, is seen as a real emblematic battle for academic freedom and for freedom of study, freedom of speech in the United States.
Okay, we need to watch that one, one of so many developing stories. And also, since we've been talking here, Karoline Leavitt has been talking there in the West Wing briefing room. We're talking about trade, covering Russia. Let's just catch up and have a listen back to that.
One on tariffs and one on Russia. Can you give us any sort of an update on which deals are in hand or are close? Which countries are reaching a deal on tariffs? And then on Russia, can you give us an update on what the agreement was with Russia? The president yesterday said that he thinks we'll be seeing some very good deals very soon. Can you talk a little bit about what Russia agreed to?
Sure. I don't want to get ahead of our United States Trade Ambassador and Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Treasury, all the great individuals who are working incredibly hard to cut these good trade deals. And the president's deeply involved in this as well. He has made it clear to his trade team he wants to personally sign off on all of these deals too. And so I don't want to get ahead of them on announcements, but obviously, as you've heard from numerous administration officials, there have been many talks with countries. We've had more than 15 deals, pieces of paper put on the table, proposals that are actively being considered. And as we've said consistently, more than 75 countries have reached out. So there's a lot of work to do. We very much understand that, but we do believe that we can announce some deals very soon.
And then on Russia, can you say, did Russia agree to anything with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff?
I don't want to get ahead of those negotiations as well. What I can tell you is that they were a productive conversation was had. As the presidential envoy Steve Witkoff said last night, he believes that Russia wants to end this war, and the president believes that as well. There is incentive for Russia to end this war, and perhaps that could be economic partnerships with the United States, but we need to see a ceasefire first, and the president and the presidential envoy Witkoff made that very clear to the Russians.
Okay, we'll pull away now from that briefing. A couple of points there for us to chew on. First of all, Adam, there she is, the press secretary, talking as if these deals, more trade deals, or 15 deals now in active discussion. She sounded as if some of that was actually imminent when it came to discussion. That maybe there's something going on here that would justify the British optimism.
Well, I don't share the optimism, but for those people... Of some kind. Yeah, of some kind. But, yeah, look, it's very simple. I mean, it goes back to our previous conversation about Harvard. If you are willing to make concessions to the Trump administration, then you can have a deal. It's not necessarily to your advantage, but you may feel that for fear of something worse. And remember that all these negotiations are taking place under the threat of much more severe tariffs that would probably damage the economy. So, you know, I think discussions may be underway, but the questions, you know, will remain, as you've been talking about today, for the British government. How much do they want to give away on taxation and regulation of digital giants? How much do they want to give away for agricultural access to the United Kingdom by American farmers in exchange for what in particular? You know, it's not a miracle that a deal can happen. It's very easy if you don't have any cards or you fold your hand. Donald Trump, to use his own terms, will do a deal.
Yeah, Rachel, I mean, I keep hearing number of times now, government ministers telling us that the online regulation and a digital services tax worth maybe £800 million or more to the Exchequer, that's not on the table. That's not going to be traded away. It's not a bargaining counter. And as soon as I hear that, I then see more speculation that that's exactly what's going to happen.
So my understanding from talking to various people is there are two halves to this. One is the digital services tax, which is forecast to bring in money, but not as much. It's not a huge amount, and that might be on the table. What ministers and officials are much more wary about is watering down online safety regulations, because the Online Safety Act is seen as crucial. The idea that if something is illegal offline, it should be illegal online, and that's obviously something that the social media companies, in terms of moderating content, really don't want to have to bother with at all. So I think there are two slightly different issues there, but fundamentally, I don't think, I'm sorry to share Adam's pessimism here, I don't think that the UK is front of the queue, to borrow a phrase from Barack Obama, when it comes to these negotiations. Yes, Trump does have an affinity for the UK. Yes, JD Vance likes the UK slightly more, or rather he hates the UK slightly less than he hates the rest of Europe. But because the baseline is already 10%, it's going to be countries where the tariffs are higher that are front of the queue when it comes to those negotiations. I just wanted to say two things quickly on the Harvard story, one of which I think is sort of worth flagging. Karoline Leavitt started off her answer by talking about protecting Jewish students and making sure Jewish students felt safe. I think Jewish students, the Jewish community in the US in general, however they feel about the comments of certain pro-Palestine student protesters, and some of the behaviour really was quite disconcerting. It's not great when the Jewish community is being used as a shield for authoritarian policies from the central government. I mean, if you look at sort of Jewish history over hundreds and hundreds of years, that's not a great place to be. And I certainly feel very uncomfortable about essentially excusing what is a power grab of free speech and private universities on the very, very flimsy pretext that it is about protecting Jewish students. That is not going to help anyone. The second thing, though, is about this culture war, and I think it is a culture war that Trump is deliberately starting with the universities, knowing that they are seen, as Adam said, as they're symbolic of the elite. Also, because of everything that's been going on, you know, grad students being arrested and deported and having their visas cancelled, academics having their funding suddenly cut, all the uncertainty, all the demands, all the gangster behaviour, that is weakening American universities sort of conceptually, even if they don't bow to the pressure. And I think that is a deliberate tactic. Authoritarian regimes, very, very threatened by universities in general historically. And if that makes the academic community around the world go, maybe I won't go to Harvard or Yale or Columbia, maybe I'll look at a Canadian or a British or a European university instead, that weakening of America's historic academic power, that is part of the plan.
Okay, now, listener Stefan comes in with this counter. Says, why would the taxpayer pay $2 billion to an extremely wealthy university? Sort of echoing the line coming out of the White House. We've been hearing there in the White House about the China tariffs. I think, just to summarise what we've been seeing, Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, telling us that China needs to make a deal with the United States. Well, I mean, the ball is in their court, apparently, is the phrase that
I mean,
used.
the answer to it, to his question, is that it's to fund specific research, a large amount of it in the medical and scientific area.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and the private endowments are private endowments. This is federal funding in the way that you see in so many universities in this country.
Indeed.
As well. Well, we'll be watching this, following this up again tonight. We're going to be hearing from the president himself, and tomorrow, who knows what tomorrow may bring. Thank you for listening tonight. Our producer was Ollie Cole. Isaac was at the keyboard as always. Kate's up next. Keep listening. Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition. Coming up.
President made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding.
That's White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt speaking just now about the row between President Trump and Harvard University. We'll get you right across it. Plus, the former Justice Secretary Alex Chalk gives his verdict on the Times Crime and Justice Commission. We'll also speak